Working in production and having over 3 million plays on Spotify for mostly lo-fi songs means that I get asked often, Will, what beat should I apply to this melody I have? Well, today, friends, I have just the thing for you. What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Inspired By. My name's Will, and I'm making an assortment of music, although a lot of lo-fi, under the moniker Hushchild. I made something like this last year for the budding garage producer, but now I'm bringing my lo-fi friends the Lo-Fi Groove Companion. Today I'm going to bring you 10 percussive choices, which of course you can mix and match to fit your melodies and chord patterns. Let's not waste any time, so let's jump into it. Okay, so this is the Groove Companion. Now, of course, this whole template is available at the Patreon. The benefit of it is that you can just drag your melodies or your tracks into this dark section here and then preview all the different types of beats to that melody to see what fits best. But don't worry if you're not signed up or you don't want to, because today I'm going to walk you through how I made these particular types of beats and how you can create a template of your own as well. Being at the Patreon just saves you a little bit of legwork. Now, the first 5 channels that I have here are all focused around different types of rhythm, and the latter 5 channels are all focused on more so sound selection. We do have different rhythms in these channels as well, but they're focused a little bit more on sound selection and what you can apply to the drum samples. So this makes for a really nice template to maybe mix and match some of the sounds with some of the rhythms and vice versa as well. Let's jump straight into the first rhythmic section, which is called the Dilla. Okay, so with this first groove, we're just focusing on a 1-bar groove this time round. So we have this really lazy kind of swung pattern. And there's a really easy way to go about creating this hi-hat pattern. I've actually included it in my J Dilla inspired video. Before we get to that hi-hat pattern, we've of course got just a simple kick and snare groove. Now, originally this kick was actually placed here, but I just moved it that little bit back once we had our hi-hats arranged. Now, how do you create hi-hats like this? Well, it's actually really easy to do. What you want to do is just create 8 hi-hats and highlight them. When you highlight them, you'll notice that you get this little node before the 8th hi-hat. Just drag these notes back until they sit inside this first gray section here. So what I want you to do is delete the 3 hi-hats that follow the first downbeat, and then the 3 hi-hats that follow the next downbeat that's left. So you're immediately getting a feel of that swing, and then all you have to do is copy up those hi-hats to each of the downbeats here. To give it a more realistic drummer's feel, what I like to do, and what you'll see in a lot of the other grooves as well, is kind of take these hi-hats and with every other downbeat, just move that velocity down. Gives it a really nice accent. Now, something that's a little bit more complex that some of us live drummers do, I of course have been a session drummer for many years, is put a little ghost notes between those hi-hat hits and you get this kind of polyrhythmic pattern. Let's bring that melody back and see what it sounds like. Awesome, the rack looking nice and simple there with the kick, snare, hi-hat, and I've included a hat stomp. Sometimes nice to fade that hat stomp so it doesn't sound as sharp, so it sounds more like a closed foot hi-hat. Let's move on to the Friendly Ghost. Friendly Ghost also got 4 sounds here, kick, hat, and a snare with a little ghost note. Let's see what it sounds like. So of course with this pattern we have 2 bars, which allows you to play a little bit more with the randomness of the ghost notes to keep your listeners guessing and keep them engaged. So what do we have going on inside this template? Well, it's nice and simple. We've just got a really straight hi-hat, and I know what you're thinking, but Will, these hi-hats are offset? Well, they were originally just on the downbeat. Don't even worry, just scooch them over a little bit. Gives it a little lazy feel, and I've kind of matched those snares on the downbeat with those hats as well. Sounds pretty straight there, but once we add the kick, which is going to be falling on the downbeats, it means those snares, those hats sound a little bit lazy. Here, the kick acts as an anchor point to where our beat should sit. We've just got one kick on the downbeat and then one kick on the offbeat, and it follows that pattern all the way through. But here are our ghost notes. Now our ghost note is just a quieter note than your snare, and we've got one landing just before the third quarter note margin, and then a little gap, and we've got one after. You can see that these are quantized to the grid, one just before our second bar begins, and then one just after our third quarter note margin. Nice and simple. Let's keep moving. So this is a pattern I call almost 3 because it's almost a swung 3/4 or 6/8 groove, but not quite. I'll show you how I made it in just a second. Okay, so with the almost 3, we've just got 3 sounds, a kick, snare, and hat sample inside the drum rack here. I've eased the hat sample a little bit by just rolling off some of the lows with the EQ8 there, but that's all I've added. If we go back to our piano roll, we have this pattern. So we've got this on-beat, off-beat pattern. It means the on-beat falls on the downbeat. That means on the second quarter note margin, depending on where your BPM lies, we have this off-beat pattern. On-beat, off-beat, off-beat, on-beat, off-beat. But let's take a look at our hi-hats. So how do you make a hi-hat like this? Well, what you need to do is get used to using shortcuts. If we press Command 3, we can separate our piano roll into triplet grid view. And in triplet view with 16th selected, we can see here that actually only the middle note is changed. And all I did with the hi-hats is go from this triplet fill. So if we had all our kicks and snares in, it would sound like this. And all I did was just displace this middle note just by hand and fill. That sounds pretty good, and duplicate those. And that's it, we've got a shuffle groove that almost sounds like triplets. All right, we're on to the room maker. The room maker is brilliant because it leaves loads of space for your melodies. Check this out. Really straight hi-hat pattern. You can see once again, I've got that up-down velocity pattern with the hi-hats there. Super straight snares, but of course you can use some of the methods from before to displace some of your hi-hats, make your snares sound more lazy. But let's just look at the kick drums. We've got one kick on the downbeat, a little ghost note before the second downbeat, and then a large space. And I'm just putting this kick on the offbeat before the next downbeat, and then an offbeat. Once again, just 3 sounds inside the room maker. Let's jump on to the swinger. This one I think you're really going to enjoy. You can see that we're using a 4-bar melody here, and this is a chord pattern that stretches over 2 bars and then another chord that stretches over 2 bars. This leaves loads of space for the swinger. Now, why is it called the swinger? Well, because we're actually playing a 6/8 rhythm to the beat of a 4/4 groove. Just check out these hi-hats alone. It sounds quite fitting, right? But let's put that to the pulse of the metronome. You should feel some tension in your stomach, especially when we add the kicks and snares. It doesn't feel quite right because it's actually in 6/8. Now, if we count to that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's really quite effective at being a busy rhythm, but still giving your melody plenty of space. Keeps your listener engaged because of the lack of kick drums, kind of hides where the loop occurs. So with this, I just drew out the kicks first. First kick landing on the first downbeat, next kick landing on the quarter note before the second bar. Then I drew the snare in the center and offset these two snares to the side, and then just through fill drew out by hand the hi-hats and the ghost notes. Once you had that first loop of the hi-hats, then you could duplicate them over a second time. When choosing these drum sounds, I would choose something that is fairly dull and fairly short in its transient, meaning that there's not lots of overtones from the snare, not lots of reverb. The hi-hat patterns aren't too loud. Ace, we've got 5 more drum patterns to go, which I think are even more exciting, but I want to give you a really quick message from our sponsor first. I've been using DistroKid to release all of my lo-fi music, and they make it so easy, so effortless to get your music on over 150 stores and music streaming platforms. That includes Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple, and of course social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and even Snapchat. You want to make sure your music is as widely available to all your potential audience as possible, so don't waste any time and sign up to DistroKid today. If you use the affiliate link in the description below, you'll get 7% off your first year. I don't want to keep you too long, so let's jump back into the episode. Aces, so remember that the next 5 grooves, although they are slightly different grooves, they're more about sound selection. And this first one is called the shaker. And that's because we make use of 2 shaker samples. And we're going to focus on the drum rack a little bit more heavily in the next 5 examples. I've got a shake up and a shake down. Essentially 2 shaker samples, one that sounds a little bit higher in pitch, and then something that sounds like an egg shaker when you shake it downwards. To get this effect, you want to either just choose 2 shaker samples. I've chosen 2 from Decap's collection. And then what you want to do is warp that one shot by beats, set it to the forward mode, and then bring that envelope down from 100. This will ensure that there's not like a really long sample. And then what I would do is max out your fade out. Then with your shake down sample, we're basically going to do the inverse. We're going to do the same warp beats and then drop that envelope down to taste. But instead of maxing out your fade out, we're just going to max out the fade in. What we have in this example is something that sounds like this. Now you can probably hear that in this example, I've just kept a little gap and a little gap here. And at the end of the 2-bar rhythm, I've swapped out a snare drum for a kick drum there. Just adds a little bit of differentiation, keeps the listener guessing, and it's a nice homage to the hip hop chops of boom bap from back in the day. Moving on, we have the low pass. Another little 2-bar groove, and we see the ghost notes return once again, this time on the same snare sample, but I've just taken that velocity way down. And for the first time in this video, we have a ride cymbal as well. You've probably guessed it. The only difference with the sound selection in this one is the fact that we're using some external effects. Most importantly, the EQ8, in which we're rolling off all of the high frequencies from about 10K. So all of those harsh frequencies that are found in the upper 10K to 20K region are just dulled right down in keeping with all the lovely tape hiss or vinyl crackle that you have in your lo-fi track. That's the low pass. Let's keep it moving. This next one's called the field recorder for all you fans of taking your phone or your Zoom recorder out into the world. I don't even know what the world looks like anymore, and recording all the passing sounds of traffic, waves crashing on the beach, or anything else that you can find on your adventures. So how do we go about doing this? We have a really simple kick and snare pattern. And then I basically have these 2 Foley samples here, one longer than the other, but it doesn't really matter. Here's the first. And here's the second one. Nice short one. So the problem that I would have in just layering these pieces of Foley that you can see at the top of the piano roll on the kick and snare patterns is this. Notice how it's playing all of the time. And you would have to do some automation or, trim these sounds down, which isn't the end of the world, but takes up a lot of time within your production. So I just created this gate effect. Go back to your rack and go on your first Foley sound and just apply a gate. You can sidechain this gate to your particular instrument. So I've chosen, of course, the field recorder because that's the kit name. And then underneath, I've just chosen the kick. And basically you want your peak sound to match that of the threshold here. This was quite a long loop at first. You can dictate how long that sound goes on by adjusting the release time. So I have this second piece of Foley that's fallen on every other snare, and I have the Foley sample that was originally quite short. Now this would be the same Foley sound every single time if it wasn't for this LFO device that you can find in the sidebar of Ableton 11. I've applied the gate the same as I did before. It's quite a quiet sound, so I've brought that threshold all the way down. But as you can see here, my release is constantly moving. So what I did was I just created an LFO device, and originally it will say map on the left-hand side. Once you click map, you can assign that sound to any pot. And then all you need to do is just dial in the rate in which that pot is going to move. And I've got it on a super slow rate. And basically this means that sometimes when my sample plays, it's going to be really long, and sometimes when it plays, it's going to be really short. So you notice with that example, it kind of randomizes how long, how short your sample is going to occur for. And of course, that LFO you can apply to loads of things. So just think about the modulation possibilities there. Let's move on. This is the transient. So this is the most sounds that we've seen at one time in a drum rack. I've got a kick, snap, rim, a Foley snare, a clap, and a hi-hat here. Basically, there's a lot of busyness if we look at the piano roll on its own. Originally, it was just a very safe kick and snare pattern. And then I added a little boots and cats hi-hat action. Hi-hats only occurring on the offbeats, and then some claps. To just double up on the Foley, you can see that I've put that clap a little bit ahead of the Foley snare there, and then I coupled on my other sounds. Now these sounds should all actually be bleeding over each other, and the reason I've called this the transient is because I've gone onto each of the sounds, gone over to our warp mode that we saw earlier, set it to beats, the mode forward, and then the envelope is pretty much on 0 for all of these sounds. It makes sure that all of my sounds are just using the first part of this transient and don't have many overtones. And I'm also making sure that my sounds are transposed. The rim shot is 12 semitones up, which means it's going to be a shorter sound that sounds more like a tick than something that's low down. It's going to be bassy and take longer to play. So when you're creating a beat with a lot of busyness, consider trimming down those transients, panning them a little bit and pitching them up slightly. Finally, we're moving on to our last example called the crate digger. We're kind of going full circle here because we have a beat that isn't dissimilar to the lazy beat that we saw in the J Dilla example. The only difference here is this vinyl. Now the reason we have that vinyl loop there is oftentimes we'll find a really nice kit that will chop up from a track or actually take from vinyl. And you can hear that vinyl noise on all of these one-shot samples. But often what will happen is that we'll hear that a kick drum was taken from a certain record and the vinyl noise quickly cuts off, and the snare was taken from perhaps a different record, and again we hear that vinyl noise or that tape hiss cut off again. As we've seen before, to get a little bit more movement, a little bit more bounce out of our vinyl loop, I'm just using 2 compressors as we saw earlier in the tutorial, very heavy threshold on the kick, not so heavy threshold on the snare, and that just ensures that the vinyl noise that plays with the kick sample, the vinyl noise that plays with the snare sample can play alone, but anytime there's any space in the track, we're just replenishing that hiss, that vinyl noise that should be found, and it kind of hides the fact that these are individual snare one shots and not taken from just a loop in a record. So that's all 10 guys. Let me know what your favorite was. So there we have it, guys. What did you think of today's episode? And do let me know if you made it this far. Whilst you're down there, let me know if you want to see more groove companions for other genres and what artists we should take inspiration from in the future. Let me remind you to visit the description below, where of course you can find all my socials, the Discord and the Patreon, where you can pick up the groove companion, other templates, effects racks, stems, projects, and you can get ahead of the YouTube episodes as well. For now, guys, I thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.